River Watershed Council and how they are tied into this program. Okay, so everything that I do with my job, and all states really do with their jobs, stems back from the Clean Water Act. The national goal is to restore and maintain chemical, biological, and physical properties. You know, they want a national goal of having all waters fishable and swimmable. And also it deals with both point sources of pollution, so if you think of anything that's coming out of a pipe, and non-point sources of pollution, thinking of anything that is surface water runoff, stormwater runoff, into the rivers. This is kind of complicated, but this is how states implement the Clean Water Act. Beneficial uses, different than the way that beneficial uses are determined with water rights, and I'll talk more of each of these next. Water quality standards, we develop standards to protect those uses. Assessments, impairments, non-impairments, water quality studies, implementation to remediate, monitor, and then we kind of do it all over again.
Signatures we need.
So this is a map of the Provo River watershed, pretty much from Provo Bay and Utah Lake all the way up through the Headwaters, Mirror Lake Highway. The beneficial uses for water quality here that we are protecting is culinary, drinking water, recreation, wildlife, and agriculture. So again, everything comes back to the standards then. You know, it's in our Utah Administrative Code. Again, they're here to protect our waters and improve water quality where they are degraded. And they are looked into every 3 years through the triennial review process. So the next step then is you're looking at assessment. So every 2 years, what we do, what states do, is we take a hard look at our waters. It's kind of like a report card, if you think. You know, where do we see exceedances, where there's pollution greater than what is protective of those uses of those water quality standards, and where are we doing okay? The waters, and again, this is what we do every 2 years, states do that, and we send this report back to EPA and back to DC, to Congress, and again, every state does this. When a water body does exceed its water quality standards, it does get placed on what we call an impaired list. It refers back to a section of the Clean Water Act called the 303D list. So again, here's a map of the watershed. Anything that is kind of highlighted, bracketed, is where we see impairments. This data is all based on data that we turned into Congress in 2016. So this is our most recent finalized 303D list of impaired water bodies. So if you want to take that one step further then and saying, okay, what exactly are the pollutants of concern? You can see that we're looking anything from metals, from aluminum, arsenic, and zinc, to E. coli issues, to water temperature, pH issues in Jordanelle, and then temperature issues in Deer Creek Reservoir. So this is kind of where I get involved. If there's any questions, just let me know. I can answer them. So after a water body gets listed, these are the potential outcomes programmatically that we can do. A TMBL, which I'll get to more in a second. We can do a site-specific standard. Does the natural conditions of that particular water body that exceed our water quality standards, are they natural? You know, so then if that is the case, then we go back and we revise those standards specific to that part of the water body. We can also do something that's called a use attainability analysis, where we can go and say that if a section of the river has been protected for a cold water fishery use and it really should be a warm water, that's also something that we can take a harder look into. So in a nutshell, what is a TMDL? TMDL stands for total maximum daily load. It is the maximum amount of a pollutant a water body can receive and still meet its water quality standards. It takes into consideration, again, point sources of pollution, non-point sources of pollution as well. So through this process then, it's a document that we produce along with stakeholders. And what it looks at is it identifies sources and the causes of pollutants. It identifies a water quality goal. What is that numeric goal that we are trying to reach? It allocates pollutant sources to whether there's, point sources in the watershed or non-point sources. And it also identifies implementation strategies to restore that water. And then again, everything goes back to monitoring. We monitor, and then we take a hard look on where we at. This is what I was saying about the hard look, where monitoring is. We also develop an implementation plan. This is stakeholder-driven, locally led efforts. But once this is approved, then funding becomes available to implement this, whether through cost share programs that we manage or with our stakeholder partners. So the ones that I'm currently working on is the Provo River from Jordanelle all the way up to the Headwaters. They have elevated levels of metals in them. So we're looking at zinc and aluminum. I'm looking at Snake Creek drainage, which has high levels of arsenic in it. And then we're looking at Spring Creek, which I call the Heber Valley Northfields drainage area that has high levels of E. coli in it.
Go back.
Sure. Macroinvertebrates, bugs. Yes, water bugs, benthic invertebrates. So they have a less number than what our predictive models have shown in there. So less numbers and less diverse community than what our models show. Does that make sense? Yeah. So bugs.
Not enough bugs.
Not enough bugs. Not enough bugs. So for the first step, I'd like to take a look at the headwaters. We call them Provo River 5 and 6. We've kind of broken out hydrologically, but think of anything that's draining in from not Jordanelle, but where the highway, I think 32 crosses all the way up to Walwood. So Provo 5 from Jordanelle up to Woodland was listed on the 2016 list for failing to protect its cold water designation use, so cold water fisheries, cold water aquatic habitat, due to elevated levels of aluminum. Provo 6, then, if you think of Woodland all the way up to the headlands, then for zinc and for aluminum. And again, both of these are failing to protect its cold water use. If you think of sources, they're from rocks, mining issues, stormwater runoff, wastewater treatment facilities. And again, we're looking into these because of the possible negative effects on aquatic life. So this is kind of a zoomed in map. Is this? Oh, okay. So in the yellow, the main stem is Provo 5, so from here up to Woodland. That has elevated levels of aluminum, and then not the gray areas, but anything in the tan brown areas up here. So the soapstone drainage, the North Fork, Bench Creek have elevated levels of both aluminum and zinc.
So back to that level 5, the yellow section. What do you think is causing that? It's right around the populated area.
It is. I'll get to that in a second. These are the monitored.
You got a way of knowing how much it increases between each study?
Between each site? Yeah, that's something that we're taking. That's something that would be taken into a look into the TMBL itself. So
I'm saying this was probably studied back in 1985. Do you have a way of seeing the percent increase?
Oh, I see.
As each study period?
That is something that, yes, taking into account the historical aspect to seeing how it changes over time is something that will be addressed within the TMDL. I don't have that data analyzed at this point.
Where does that go?
Into Deer Creek, or into Jordanelle.
Why doesn't that designation continue on through then if it starts there?
The designation as the beneficial use?
No, the high levels of zinc and aluminum.
Dilution from the reservoir. Yeah. So, so the green dots is our monitoring locations. Here and here. Those are the ones that triggered the high level listings for aluminum. The red monitoring locations have high levels of zinc in them. I can go into more of this in the science and the chemical aspect, but I figured given time that we can skip this. But just know that the next couple slides you're going to see are going to be kind of crazy because of the standard changes, our water quality standard changes based on the pH levels at the time of samples. So this is a data graph that we have. Now I'm going upstream. So this again is the aluminum concentration in Provo River right above Jordanelle at the 32 crossing. And anytime you see, you have it here, I have it circled, anytime you see a dot over the line, we have a problem basically. For our metal analysis, for our assessment, we say that a water body is impaired if we have one exceedance over a 3-year period. And so for the 2016 listing, we had 2 exceedances from 2008 to 2014. So moving upstream then, this is still looking at aluminum, but now at the Woodland site, we see that we had 5 exceedances during this time period.
Could that be in the samples? Contamination in the sample?
Is it due to the contamination? No, we have strict QA/QC procedures to minimize this. Okay, so
do you have the same lab do the analysis?
yes, our state lab does the analysis. Oh, and then Chemtech 4 as well. We do kind of a split sampling to make sure that there's no variation within the labs. So switching then from aluminum now to zinc, here's the zinc concentration. Not a huge data set here. During the time period of 2009 to 2010, which is the only time that this site was sampled, we only had 1 exceedance. But again, that's enough to trigger an impairment listing for our assessment period. That is the one thing that the TMDL will address is that it wasn't an outlier? Was it just a fluke? I mean, was there something else in the water that caused that exceedance? And is that really truly the condition? So again, that's something that the TMDL will address. So here is the zinc concentration at Cobble Rest. Again, you can see that we've got exceedances. But the thing that was very interesting to me is kind of looking into this then, as if you guys are familiar with the Broadhead Meadows area up there, we had 100% exceedance of zinc in that area. And again, it's kind of the limit data set. We were only out there in 2009, 2010. I do know of additional data that some of the universities have collected that have shown elevated levels as well in the process of combining all that. But it's very interesting to me up in this area, and I've toured that area extensively. I'm not really sure where this is coming from. Okay. So if there's any more questions on metals in the Upper Provo, I'd like to switch gears and talk about E. coli issues in Spring Creek. So Spring Creek, Heber Valley area, so if you think about the Northfields area that drains down into that, was listed on the 2012-14 303D list due to elevated levels of E. coli. And again, this was not protective of its contact recreation. We all know why E. coli is bad. I'm not going to go into this unless you guys want me to. These are the sites that we had monitored throughout this particular watershed, and the one that triggered the listing is right here, Spring Creek above the confluence of Provo River. So for E. coli then, we look at a 10% exceedance. Anything, if we have samples that exceed 10% of the time, it gets listed on a 3D list. And so at that Spring Creek site above the confluence of Provo, we had an exceedance of our standard 91% of the time. And the assessment looks into both the, in the recreational season, so when people would actually be exposed to this most, which is May through October. So switching gears again, now we're moving on to Lower Snake Creek. So Lower Snake Creek has been listed on the 303D list since 2006 due to elevated levels of arsenic, and it's failing to protect its culinary or drinking water use. The site that triggered this listing, again, is the lowest site in the watershed, which is right above the Provo River. And you can see here that it exceeds our standard 100% of the time. This first graph up here is the data that we used to actually list it in 2006, or for the listing, 2008 to 2014. And then I wanted to take a little bit more in-depth look because we've got a good monitoring set here. Is, you know, we go back all the way to 92 here, all the way to 2015, and it still exceeds 100% of the time. So what's next? What I've been working then is the first initial steps is to validate the data, the listing. Was there a problem in the listing of, in the 303D list? And you could see that the data does follow and is current with our assessment methodology. So the next step then is to kind of determine, we have increased our monitoring efforts as of October of last year, and you can see all the dots up here are representative of where we're monitoring and what partners we use to help monitor. To better understand the sources and where they're coming from and the seasonality of them. Are we seeing exceedances only during runoff? Are we seeing exceedances all year long? And then I've been meeting with the local stakeholders, local landowners to kind of get a better understanding about potential sources in the watershed. This TMDL will go through a watershed characterization, more in-depth for data inventory, source assessment, and an analysis plan. The TMDL is also developed with, heavily involved with stakeholder influence, and then also throughout the Provo River Council. So the goal of this is to have this completed in 2019. Is when we told EPA that this would be done. But again, it's stakeholder driven. So Commissioner Farrell had asked me to present a little bit about the Provo River Watershed Council. Doug actually sits on the board of this, and I wanted to kind of give you guys a little bit of an update on who we are and what we do. The Provo River Watershed Council was initially named as the Jordanelle Technical Service Advisory Council, JTEC, and this was formed in the 1980s under Governor Matheson to develop a reservoir management plan for both Deer Creek and Jordanelle. This was due to handling the excessive nutrients in Deer Creek back in the early 1980s. In Deer Creek Reservoir, and then also help address some of the environmental concerns with building Jordanelle. And during this time period then, by 1984, we did develop a water quality management plan. If you kind of take a step back, then you could see that JTEC was one of the first watershed councils in the U.S. at that time. In 2005, we changed our name to the Provo River Watershed Council, realizing that you can't just look at one part of a watershed. You need to take into consideration the watershed as a whole. So our mission statement is to promote and support watershed best management practices to ensure water quality use for all its users.
What did you say?
We recently have voted on a governing board, which is made up of Central Water Conservancy District, Jordan Valley. We serve as the executive secretary with no voting rights. The Metropolitan Water District of Orem, the Metropolitan District of Provo, and Wasatch County. The council at large is made up of an array of users, anywhere from the Provo River watershed users to federal partners, state partners, and special interest group like Trout Unlimited.
Summit County involved with that, because a large portion of this river is in Summit County.
That's a good question. We have been, in the past year, once we kind of got, we got an interlocal agreement signed, we created the board, we have been starting to reach out to both Summit County and Utah County then, and we have a placeholder for them, for those members to sit on our board. Utah County has been involved as part of the council at large, but not part of the governing board. Utah County, or Summit County, were very interested in the development issues that are going there above the Trans-Basin diversion, but they're not there yet. So we are having discussions. It's just going at a very slow pace. So what we do in a nutshell, education, awareness, water quality management, from sampling to analyzing reportings, looking at these water quality trends, development reviews, but we also support other programs such as the quagga mussels at Deer Creek, Main Creek restoration up in Wallsburg, harmful algal blooms, which has been, which we have been dealing with more recently last year, and then spill events, especially in the canyon. The cool thing about this watershed group is that it allows us to pull a lot of our resources. So the funding members, we actually put in $335,000 a year, but because of what the stakeholders and partners are able to pull and to leverage, we actually operate at over a $2 million budget. Okay, in a nutshell, any questions?
Sandy, who is the stakeholders on this study?
This study, yes. So how I envision this, and again, there's so many different uses. There's so many, what's going on up in the headwaters of the Provo is completely different than what's going on here locally versus what's going on in Snake Creek. So I think that even though we say this is all wrapped up into one document, there will be 3 separate stakeholder groups formed. And we've been compiling a list of those as of now. So yeah, we've been meeting with Midway. We met with the Midway Irrigation Company. We met with trying to figure out what's going on with Snake Creek, and then also too with the forest, really up on the headwaters, and then started working through the conservation district, Wasatch Conservation District, with this in the Spring Creek area. So yes, a lot more locally led efforts. So what I would imagine is that in the next year then taking a review of all the monitoring data that we've been collecting, and then meeting with stakeholders as well, kind of determining, okay, what approach do we want to take with this, kind of come up with a consensus and a game plan, and then if you guys would like, I would love to come back and present our findings to you. This TMDL does first get approved by our water quality board, and then it does get submitted to EPA. But the local stakeholders, they're the ones who actually helped me draft it. So again, there's a lot of voice for public input throughout this process.
So, one question.
Sure.
You think the levels are high enough in the waters where you're suggesting that we don't eat the fish in the river?
Carl?
Separate. We have a fish consumption advisory. Arsenic is not, excuse me, Carl, who's water quality?
He's my boss.
Arsenic is not an issue with fish consumption to the extent or levels that we measured. But there are other pollutants in the water, specifically mercury, that I would have to look up. And generally, you find those issues in the reservoirs, lakes and reservoirs.
So we have some more of those issues in the Uinta Basin with mercury fish consumption. But that is something that part of the study does look into, is pulling in that biological component. I know that DWR and the Forest Service has collected a lot of fishery data, and then we'll be able to incorporate that into the TMDL document as well. But so far, no advisories on fish consumption.
Sandy, back to the Midway area.
Sure.
If we find that the arsenic is natural to the area, and how will you treat that?
If we find, as you guys know much better than I do, that there's a lot of geothermal activity in that area. We are sampling several springs, Mahogany Springs, Gerber Springs. We are also sampling both of the tunnels that come through and that drainage. If we find out that it is background information, then we wouldn't do a TMDL. If you remember that one slide that I referenced back to, we would do a site-specific arsenic standard for that area then. And again, that's something that the data that we're collecting now can help address. That's why it's so critical to make sure that we are monitoring the most representative areas, that we're not too far off base on that.
It's probably coming out of those old mines, isn't it? Wouldn't it be coming out of those old mines?
Well,
Possibly.
Could be.
Yeah. So we are sampling both of those.
But one of the things that's happened, you keep raising the level of arsenic, you know, when you're sampling, or lowering the level for drinking water.
For drinking water. Yeah, the drinking water standards for this is it's a little different than the general water quality concerns we have. I don't know, Carl, if you know a little bit more about that than I do.
History of the standards.
For drinking water? Yeah, I do. I know that's a question that you had, and I will give you more information on exactly why that has been. But the standard that we have adopted is for water quality. It's a little bit more, I think it's a little bit less stringent than what it is for the actual drinking water standard.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
I think it'd be good to have you come back with that final report and finish things up. And then I'll have them-
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks.